Self-knowledge, week 2. Best and worst performances. We've all competed well in the past. We've all competed poorly in the past. We want to build consistency. If you look to the best athletes in the world, they talk about one word when it comes to performance, and the word begins with a C, and I already said it, consistency. A lot of people think it's confidence. Confidence is great, but it seems like even more importantly, great athletes talk about consistency. How do I perform well on a regular basis, not just once in a while? That's your question to us, and here's our answer to you. You need to really get clear on what was going on in your mind before your best performances and during your best performances, and compare that with knowing exactly what was going on in your mind and your worst performances in your mind and the things that you were doing. So best and worst performances, writing it down. And what we find on a regular basis, that when you actually do this exercise, it seems like two totally different people, and it really proves the importance of mindset. So, as we were saying, first step, write down your best and your worst performances. And notice I didn't just say wins. I didn't say wins at all, actually. I said times that you've competed at your best, times where you really felt like you were operating at or even above your potential, if that even makes sense. Write that down and be as specific as you can. What exactly was I thinking? What exactly was I telling myself? Push yourself here. You have to dig deep. The more pieces of information you could come up with, the more things that you could remember, the better this is going to be for you. Every little piece of information is a gold nugget of information. So write that down. Then, after you're done with that, on a different piece of paper, notice I didn't say the back of the paper, on a different piece of paper so you could hold the two up side by side. You could compare the two. What was I thinking before and during my worst competitions? Now again, notice I didn't say your worst losses. I said your worst competitions, times you felt like you underperformed, that you did a lot worse than you maybe ever did before. What was going on in your mind? What exactly were you telling yourself? Push yourself here. Don't just say, I was nervous. Why exactly was I nervous? What exactly was I thinking about? Push yourself there. The more pieces of information you could come up with, the more thoughts, the more fruitful this exercise is going to be. Then, once you're done with that, you know now exactly what you were thinking, feeling, and doing before and during your worst and best competitions. You compare them side by side. And when we do this with an audience, when we do this with a group of athletes, I always ask, what did you notice about all this? Does it seem like the same person or two totally different people? And everyone says the same thing. It's like two totally different people. It's two completely different mindsets. What does that prove to you? It shows how important your mindset is. If we're talking about your best performances and worst, and it seems like they're two totally different people, they're opposites. It shows that your performance has almost everything to do with your mindset. And a lot of other factors are just not nearly as important, and this worksheet proves that. This exercise proves that to you. So again, you want to be, when you're doing this, when you're writing it down, you want to think about thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Be as specific as possible. Really get back to your mentality when you were in those situations. Who was around? What were you telling yourself? What did you eat? What music did you listen to? What was going on? Really paint the picture, and the more specific you are, the more you're going to have a real great idea of what you should do more of and what you should do less of. The secret behind this exercise is find your best performances and then go through. You got to do this over. I don't like it. I don't like it. Okay. I don't like it. I could have done this a lot better. You know what stinks? This is actually the longest period of time where I've gone without presenting these exercises in seasons. Just like I present this to teams all the time. Yeah. So I know how it's supposed to sound, and because it doesn't, it just doesn't work. Right. Unfortunately.
Stand up, stretch.
I know I have go-tos for each one of these things, and then when you don't say it, it's like I'm missing even the main lessons. Mm-hmm. I mean, the lesson was talking about. What do I want to say? I wanted to hit on. You can't even talk about confidence if you can't talk about consistency. You don't talk about consistent thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Like, what's going on here? It's like, yeah, we're done with this one.
get a different toilet seat. At Home Depot, they have like a $50 one with a backlighting in it. It's blue and it's thinner. And it goes down really slow. And it's longer, so your penis doesn't hit the tip of it all the time.
That's true.
Thank you for calling Nicole.
Bless you. Bless you. $34.7. All right, we can do it again. Ba-dum. I didn't even explain that. We're good? Yeah?
Ready?
Yeah. Self-knowledge, week 2. Best and worst performances. If you look at the top athletes, they always bring up one word when they talk about their performances. Consistency. A lot of people think it's confidence, but it's actually consistency. We all perform well sometimes, and we all perform lousy other times. The key is, how do I perform really well on a regular basis? Consistency. We can't even talk about having a consistent performance if we don't first talk about having consistent thoughts, consistent feelings, and consistent behaviors. One of the best ways to get some clarity on the situation is by writing down your best competitions, your best performances, and on a different piece of paper, your worst performances. And the idea on both of these is to think about exactly what was going on in my mind. What thoughts was I having? What feelings was I having? What songs was I listening to? What behaviors was I taking? What actions was I taking? You want to have that all written down, be as specific as possible, and dig deeper than the surface. Right? Get under the surface. What exactly was going on? Every piece of information that you come up with is a gold nugget. Really bring yourself back to those performances and see what was going on in your mind. So, again, step 1, write down your best performances on one page. I like you to do it on one page if you can, because the idea here, the whole point of this is to find what is the underlying theme. Is there any consistent pattern? Is there any thread that goes through all of these best performances? We're looking for patterns. But first things first, don't even think about the pattern. Write down your best 3 performances. What was going on in your mind? What exactly were you thinking? Like I said, push yourself. Don't just say you were confident. Why were you confident? What thoughts were you having? And why? So write that down. One competition at a time, what was going on in your mind. And if you're like most people, these are the things you tend to think about. I was focusing on my technique. I was treating all opponents the same. My intensity level was consistent. I wasn't making it into a big deal. There were no special performance. I was just doing what I was always doing. I was just being me. It's a new competition. I'm not thinking about the past or the future. And I don't care who's watching me, or I don't care who's in front of me. That's what most people tend to think. Well, go through this exercise for yourself. Write down those 3 competitions, and then after you're done, come up with any of the themes that are going on. Either circle them, or highlight them, or write them on the back of this page. Now, after you're done with that, you're going to do the same exact thing with your worst performances. What exactly were you thinking before and during your worst performances? You always want to think before and during. What exactly was it? And push yourself. Don't just say you were nervous. Why were you nervous? What exactly were you telling yourself? What were the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that you were taking before and during these performances? That's going to give you some clarity in what you don't want to tell yourself. Okay? So, before you go through those themes, those patterns, those threads, write it down as specific and concretely as possible. We started with the positive, right? Because we like to start off on a good foot, gets us started, gets the ball rolling. Well, now it's a little bit harder. A lot of times we don't like to think about the negatives that were going on in our mind. We don't like to relive those bad performances, but it's so important that we do that. So write that down. And if you're like most people, here are the common themes we find in your best performances. We're not focused on our best moves, our best techniques. We're focusing on our opponent's best techniques. What are our opponent's strategies? We're trying to defend our opponent instead of imposing our will on our opponent. We're overestimating our opponent or we're underestimating our opponent. Again, our orientation, our focus is not on ourselves, it's on them. Having an up and down intensity level. Looking at the competition as a big competition or looking at it as a small competition. Thinking about letting down our parents, our coaches, our friends, our family. We're thinking of the significance of a competition. This is a championship, or this is the semifinals, or this is a rivalry game. We do that, and it tends to mess us up. We're thinking about records, rankings, seedings, predictions. And we're thinking about what happened the last time we competed against this opponent. Or we're thinking sometimes about the last time we competed in general. So, if you're like most people, those tend to be the reoccurring themes. So, you write those down, you find those underlying themes, the patterns, the underlying thread behind all of them, maybe either circle them, highlight them, or write it on the back. Then you want to have on those two different pieces of paper, side by side, you look at them, and you can see they're usually two different people. Almost everyone raises their hand when I lead a group discussion with this. They say it's like opposite people. It's two totally different people. It stresses, it really shows, it demonstrates how important your mindset is. These are your best and worst competitions, and you look like two totally different people, which shows that almost all of it is in the mind. So have those written down. You compare those side by side, and here's the secret right here. When you look at those best performances and you find those patterns, those themes, do more of that. Tell yourself more of that. And when you look at those worst performances, do less of that. When you find those underlying themes and patterns, tell yourself less of those. Now again, I went through some of the most common things that we hear when we speak to other athletes. By and large, I would say that's true, and it's probably true for you, but there's always going to be some variability. You might be a little bit different than those people that I read, those common situations that we just spoke about. Some people, they make a competition into a really big deal and they do well. That's few people, it's the minority. But if that's you, do more of it. Like we said, the secret to success is find out what works and do more of it. Find out what doesn't work and do less of it. And very frequently, most people don't ever put this down on paper. You want to have it down on paper because when we keep it in our head, it's just floating around. It's theoretical, it's philosophical, it's an abstraction. Once you put it down on paper, now you can see it. You could add to it. You could take things away from it. And this exercise is supposed to be a work in progress. So when you compete really well, don't just pat yourself on the back and go out to dinner. Write it down. What exactly was I thinking? What exactly was I doing? What exactly were my emotions? And when you compete really poorly, again, don't just kick yourself, don't just beat yourself up. Write it down on the other performances. What exactly was I thinking, feeling, and doing? Make it a work in progress. Get greater clarity on what you need to do to bring out your best and avoid competing at your worst.